Hi, and welcome to Spectrum Projection, a media review podcast where we analyse characters who may fit into the autism spectrum. I'm Hannah, an actually autistic person with a master's in literature, focusing on the analysis of disability in fiction and in memoir.
And I'm Tilda. And famous Swedish children's book author Astrid Lindgren, what are you doing in my falafel?
Trigger warnings in the description.
Heya!
It's been so long. Not for any real good reason, I have to be honest.
I mean, other than that you literally went away for a while there.
Yeah, I went to London for the first time in ages, and it took a lot out of me, because London fucking sucks.
London sucks. I'm sorry, Jem.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Jem. But you're the only person in London who likes London, and even I don't think that's even true for you anymore, so we're allowed to say it even more. I don't like London. If you're someone who is not English, and you wonder about how nice London is, it's like every other European city. And I can say that. It's like every other European city. Every one of them has like one cool thing that makes them specific, and then everything else about them is exactly the same.
Like, London is the kind of city where it would be perfectly tolerable if it wasn't so full of fucking people.
And that was true even with like COVID stuff as it is right now. I have done lateral flow tests and everything. I'm fine. I did them frequently during my traveling, so I don't have COVID.
I have a thing I wanted to say first. I wanted to be the first one. But I won't be the first one. But I wanted to say congratulations to Sia for all the Razzie she won.
Yes!
Yay!
Fucking justice exists in the world. 3. I didn't even know that she.
I think she won. She got worst director. I think Maddie Ziegler got worst actress or worst supporting actress, and then a third one I don't remember. But nobody deserves it more than you, Sia. I'm so happy for you.
Yeah, I'm so glad this movie you made entirely to like boost your own ego ended with you getting an award specifically designed for the worst possible movies made. And in direction, because you said like I couldn't possibly have an autistic actor because it'd be too hard to direct. Turns out you're so shit you couldn't even direct an actor you thought you were like tailor-made to direct. So good job there, Sia. You absolutely earned every single accolade this film has fucking gotten in terms of Razzies. Fuck you. Honestly, like, it does my heart good to know it has been panned not only by the autistic community, but also by the art community, because those two don't always see eye to eye.
I was going to make a joke about autistic people and eye contact, but I feel like I'm not the right person to make that.
I mean, it's very good. I'm in favour of that. But yeah, I'm glad that for once those two factors have kind of come together, because like a lot of the time inspiration porn type stuff like Forrest Gump will win a ton of awards. It's so inspiring. This film didn't do that. And I'm glad that it's been recognised as nothing but trash, because it's not even good inspiration porn for, you know, neurotypicals, because it's just so fucking terrible.
You know what? You know those videos your aunt or grandma likes on Facebook about, you know, adorable little children with disability? At least those have the decency of being short.
Yeah, God.
10 minutes is perfectly enough to tell any kind of inspiration porn story. Feature film length? Fuck you.
I mean, there is also the thing of, like, the things that like are shared on Facebook about kids and stuff, like that's a whole other depressing thing.
Yeah,
but at least in
I
the context
brought it up.
but at least in the context of Facebook videos like that, it's like someone is actually trying to achieve something, like sympathy, like something positive, even if it's fucked up in a bad way to do it and arguably wrong.
Yeah.
Sia's film, I don't know what the fuck she was trying to communicate. So
other than making Sia look good,
which it didn't do. So, you know, get fucked. Like, honestly, I didn't know anything about Sia and I had nothing against her until this started. It's dumb, and we're actually talking about some stuff that is aimed at children today. Specifically, I think, in relation to this whole idea of, like, trying to, like, bring some humanity to first impressions of autistic people. Because speeches like that, where it's like they may not contribute anything, but they're nice to be around, don't really work at trying to, like, reduce this othering that autistic people face. Like, they don't really do anything to make them feel like people. They just become like subjects of like pity, or subjects
pets,
to like,
basically.
Yeah, they become pets, or like
that's literally what how people describe cats.
Yeah, it's a bad time, and like
cats don't contribute to the GDP, but they sure are enjoyable to be around.
Except for the fact that many cats are not enjoyable to be around because that's their personality, and that's fine.
Fuck yeah.
People
I love me a bitchy cat.
People can exist without contributing anything because they're people. That's allowed. No one is expected to do anything more than exist. Nobody asked to exist.
Especially not cats. This podcast supports shitty cats. If you want to bite someone or kick something off a table, just do it.
Why the fuck not?
Why the fuck not? Why shouldn't you?
I mean, cats are also a very common, like, metaphor people use to explain autism to children. And, like, there's complexities to any metaphor you use for any real-world situation. Like, even stuff like, you know, X-Men as a metaphor for civil rights or whatever, like... No matter how much good they do, it's never going to be a good metaphor for something as complex and difficult and, like, you know, so specific as a real civil rights movement.
Yeah.
Like, it can never be a one-to-one metaphor for, like, disability rights or for, like, queer rights or racial inequality. Like, no metaphor is ever going to be one-to-one, so you cannot pin your hopes on it being, like, this will make people care, because it's not how it works.
Yeah, if they don't care about the actual thing, you clothing it in, you know, sci-fi or metaphor isn't going to make them any closer to accepting it.
It's why we're talking about two shows, one of which is aimed at preschoolers and one of which is aimed at kids a bit older, like 7, 8, 9. Like, it's kind of hard to tell. We're talking about Arthur, which we both grew up with, and I don't know anyone who didn't grow up with it.
Yeah,
like,
it feels kind of universal. Obviously, I grew up with it dubbed into Swedish, but, you know, it's basically the exact same thing.
Arthur is like, I don't know how to describe Arthur because it feels like such a universal, but it's like a very slice of life. Here's a kid in everyday life. Everyone in it is animals. He's an aardvark. And like...
It's so fucking funny that he... Oh, should I swear in an episode that...
We've already sworn. We've already broken bad. There's a trigger warning. Sia.
Yeah. But anyway, he doesn't look like any animal, but he's supposedly an aardvark.
I mean, apparently his design changed a lot from the books.
Yeah, I love that. It's
show.
So funny to see that progression.
But basically everyone in it is animals, and it's very much like an educational entertainment show for kids, but it's not too heavy on the PSA style of storytelling, I don't think. I don't remember it being that.
I think the thing is, because it's so like unusually grounded in reality for a kids show, it kind of automatically becomes like PSA, but not in a very preachy way, because it's just about situations that you may encounter in real life as a child, and you know, basically it's about these kids dealing with stuff that happens to them.
Yeah. The episode we're talking about is season 13, episode 6, which is called When Carl Met George. And it doesn't feature the main character, Arthur, at all. It features side characters, which the show does a lot. It's something that's quite interesting to see how it's developed, because, like, it becomes really clear that, like, the characters have different personalities, and that the character of George, who is a deer, he has antlers, is quite awkward and shy.
He's Swedish.
Oh, yeah, he is Swedish.
Yeah.
But
I did a peace sign there because,
represent.
Finally, my people's voice can be heard. I'm sorry.
But my point is, like, they seem to know the characters that would be best fit for certain stories.
Exactly.
Because
I do love that so much, but, like, these characters are so well defined that the writers realized that to tell this kind of story, we should use this character.
Yeah, because George's character is, like, quite awkward, a little bit shy, but not, like, too shy. He has a lot of, like, obscure hobbies. He has, for some reason, there's a 90s 2000 trend of kids who are a bit weird being into ventriloquism. I don't know why. It was in Goosebumps, it's in this. I don't know why.
Honestly, if I had the means as a child, like, we went to the market, like, was it a Christmas market or something? Anyway, we went to, like, a market in town, and they had, like, a whole booth where they sold puppets, and we looked at each other and like, ooh, because they were, like, the nice, well-made puppets, you know, proper, like, Muppet style stuff.
Like Jim Henson, fully articulated.
Like,
the other show we're talking about is Sesame Street, by the way, and we will get to it later.
I like puppets, like, kind of, and ventriloquism.
I've grown to appreciate it as I've gotten older, like the artistry behind it, but as a kid it never really interested me. But, like, in this whole thing, like, George is, like, a little bit awkward, like, he does a lot of strange hobbies, and, like, I think they decided on that character rather than Arthur, because, like, there's, like, a way that you can relate to this other character who they're introducing called Carl. And Carl is autistic, and if you don't know what he looks like, which you probably wouldn't because I think he's only a one-off character, he looks like Griffin McElroy, and I hate that.
So much as any, you know, white or white-coated character with glasses looks like Griffin McElroy.
It's the meme. It's that, like, people think that he looks like Griffin, and if you don't know who Griffin McElroy is, you're going to not understand anything I talk about for most of the time, I guess.
Honestly, don't worry about it.
But like this episode starts with a bit of like, it's like a story within a story thing. They start at the end.
Yeah, it's the main character basically telling the story to you, the audience.
And it starts off with Carl and George being friends, and they're drawing pictures together. And George has drawn a picture of a lion, and he asks Carl, "What do you think of my drawing?" And then he gives a really, really honest, like, "That's a lion. It's brown." Like, he gives a very matter-of-fact describing the picture.
Yeah.
And then...
And I think he says, "I don't like brown," or "I like brown."
I think he says, "I don't like brown," which of the two choices, I think is like the one that's more honest, because like, especially with younger children who haven't had many opportunities to learn masking or like regulating what they say, things they say will just be very negative because that's what it is. It's a negative thing. So you just reflect it as it is.
Yeah, honestly... This is going to sound more depressing than I mean it. It's like funny, but life has a lot of negative shit in it.
Yeah.
Like, I mean that in a funny way. Like, just life, There's so much to bitch about. And I love that because I love bitching.
And while they're drawing, George has a look at Carl's picture, and Carl's picture is a really detailed, exact drawing of a train. And like, this is from the like mid-2000s, this episode. And it is quite stereotypical. Like, it's a little white boy who likes trains, and he
has like perfect recall.
And excellent art skills. And like, it's all very stereotypical, but I think part of that stereotype is part of the time, for one, because that's a lot of how like public culture was around autism at that time. They hadn't quite come to terms with the fact that it can vary quite a lot beyond that.
Yeah.
And also it's a thing of like, these are the kind of traits that people can be public with their autism at this point, that people can identify as being part of their autism. Because as much as it's a stereotype, there is like a core base for that stereotype.
Yeah.
And basically this kid goes on to like info dump about the train because George asks like, "Oh wait, yeah, what are you drawing?" And he says, "Oh, this is a 1936 locomotive and it uses these kind of pistons and it uses these kind of connections." And he goes on and on and on and doesn't listen to George like trying to talk to him. And George doesn't seem like bothered by that. He's like, "Oh yeah, this is just how he is." And he like says, "No, I'm going to tell you the story of how he met."
Yeah, he turns to the audience at that point, which bit rude.
Yeah.
But I guess that's like sort of like an out of universe thing that happens.
Yeah, they do a lot of transition music. They never change the transition music in any of the episodes.
The show's been around for like decades at this point.
And they only have like a sound bank of maybe 15 sounds they use for transitions. And every time they transitioned at any point, I was like, "Oh my god, that's so nostalgic for me." Because I heard that sound hundreds of times. I didn't have like access to a lot of the other channels, so like I only had like public access kids TV really. So Arthur was like
us too for a while.
Arthur was like one of the main things I watched.
Yep.
And it goes back into this point where George is with his dad at this woodworking class, and he's like working on his puppet with his dad, and his dad asks him, "Can you go get some wood glue?" And George goes out of the room to another room where Carl is finishing a puzzle, and he goes over to see him. And at that point, Carl is sitting by himself, and he says, "I'm waiting for my mum to get back. She's going to bring me apple juice in a box, not a bottle." Like, that specificity is really familiar. Like, I remember my brother being exactly like that. He's still like that to an extent. And George goes over and starts saying stuff like, "Hey, let's hang out." And Carl's like, "Hang out of what?" And then he's like, You're pulling my leg." And then he says, "No, I'm not." Like, it's like such a direct thing, but I think it's a really good like microcosm example of like being ultra literal that kids can understand. It's like, they don't seem to get it. Whereas like,
it's basically like introducing that idea of starting to think about your own language in a different way, where you might automatically know what hangout means to the point where like you forget what the literal words mean. Because hangout just means to hang out. But then you're like, oh yeah, the actual literal meaning of the words is different.
And it's a thing of like, kids have a very like, my understanding of the world is everyone's understanding of the world. Like, you are so sure you know everything that like having that point of view to like point out like, hey, this person is understanding this differently is really helpful. Because like kids, everyone says kids are shitty, and they can be, but like kids need to learn empathy. Like, they need like examples of empathy shown to them. Like, at this point, George gets on okay with this kid. They don't really like do anything friendly together. They just kind of talk for a little bit while his mum comes back. And he says, like, he was really strange. I couldn't tell if he liked me or not. And I think that was like a because I watched this episode when I was a kid, and my brother had been diagnosed with autism, and I didn't really like know how to approach it. But like stuff like that, where it says I couldn't tell if they liked me or not, like I think it helps to have that kind of feelings first response. Like as someone who is interacting with someone with autism, you can acknowledge the fact that you can't tell how they feel about you.
Yeah.
And it's confusing and it might be a little frustrating, but that's not anyone's fault. Like,
yeah.
There is no negative in this episode. Like, there's no point where he's like, this kid hates me, or I've ruined everything forever. Like, it's mostly just like, this kid just doesn't, I don't really understand how to read this kid.
Yeah, well, there's a little bit of like, oh, I've ruined it, because stuff that happens later, but...
So George decides to come back and meet this kid on the next day, and he brings his puppet Wally, who is a giraffe, who is fucking terrifying. I'm sorry, that's a scary ass giraffe.
Also, the plot point is that he is bringing a piece of the puzzle Carl was laying that had somehow fallen into his pocket when he bumped the table. So he's like, oh, I'm going to bring this back to him, and then I'm going to show him my puppet.
Yeah, because I think he would like it, because he seems to like hobby stuff. And he comes back and he's like, hey, I've got something to show you. And he surprises him with this puppet.
He opens his bag and just the puppet is staring out with its teeth.
Fucking horrified. So many teeth. So defined.
Again, and I this is a thing when, you know, this made me think of the whole comparing Sia's... I'm sorry that music keeps coming up, but it's like still stuck in my soul, and I need to sort of like work it out of my system.
I do also think it's like a very archetypal, so many problems with autism.
Yeah, but we had this, we were talking about this, I forget if we did talk about this in an episode or if it's just us talking, but comparing it to that Disney short Loop, and how using visual language to communicate how someone who perceives reality different from you is feeling, where they show this puppet and like, until this point, it hasn't really been shown to us in a scary way. Like, it's been presented in a very neutral way when, you know,
George is using it. Like, there's a lot of George does the voice for it, and he just moves it around.
And
it's all very friendly.
Little conversations with them. But when he opens his backpack, we see this, you know, really close up on the puppet with all its teeth, because we are now seeing it from George's perspective and...
From Carl's perspective.
To help us understand why he becomes scared.
Mm-hmm. And like there's it moves slowly towards the screen, and there's like fairly like deep shadow on it. It's like, it's not scary looking, but you can tell that the vibe they're trying to put forward is intimidating.
Yeah.
As opposed to like, this is actually going to fuck a kid up. It's very intimidating. And Carl immediately gets overloaded. And I was kind of impressed, like, for this era especially, like, they were very, like showing on screen, this is what an overloader looks like. Yes. There's a lot of grunting, like, going over to a corner, curling up really small, like, grabbing their hair.
Yeah. And I think that that's so important to show, like, what it actually looks like. To, not feel like that's something that you need to hide or be embarrassed about, but also, you know, showing to neurotypical kids, like, if this happens, it's not, you know... a horrible disaster. It's just something that happens. You don't need to be scared of it.
No one is going to get physically hurt. And they make a point of like, Carl's mom comes back in at this point with his apple juice and says, oh, it's okay. I'll talk to him. I'll sit with him. And
she's very calm and, you know, smiling and just like, you know, reassuring George and talking to Carl in a very calm and not like upset manner at all.
And George's gut instinct is to say, how can I help? What can I do? Well, I did something wrong, I'm really sorry. And Carl's mom says, it's not your fault, which is also true, because he didn't know. And they make it really clear, like, if you didn't know and you trigger this kind of thing, yes, it's upsetting, but like, if you didn't know, and these things are like triggers you wouldn't know, it's fine, it happens. As long as everyone is looked after, that's okay. And then the thing that I really admired was like, thank you for offering for help, but you can't help right now. Because there's also a tendency, again, Stia's movie is a really good sign of like, when someone is having an overload, you feel this tendency to like, I need to jump in and do something and help and get involved. And it's like, if someone is overloaded because of sensory issues, because of like just feeling overwhelmed, getting involved and adding more stimulus to the situation is bad.
Yeah. Like there is no room for, you know, being a hero in that situation.
Like the best thing you can do is just kind of like sit with them quietly until they are able to communicate what they would want if they want anything else. And like I think that kind of helps because like again with kids, especially empathetic kids, like your gut instinct is I'm going to get involved and I'm going to help and I'm going to do stuff that makes me feel better. But like it's helpful to say like you can't, and that's okay. Like, you can't do anything right now. And it's really sweet, and honestly, like, it's played as upsetting, but it's not played as traumatic or anything. And she's like, oh, it's a little thing, it happens. And Carl's mom explains, oh, he has Asperger's. It's of the era. They don't use that term anymore, but it was the term of the time. And afterwards, George goes to Brain's ice cream shop. I forgot about this subplot in this show, but
oh yeah, one of the characters who is the smart kid who his real name can't be Brain.
No, it's Alan.
Yeah,
but he goes by Brain.
Yeah,
and he works in his parents' ice cream shop, and like he's the one they go to who's really smart. And George is sitting there kind of commiserating. Like, I don't know what I did wrong. She says that he had asp something, and he's like, oh, Asperger's. It's like, oh yeah. My uncle has Asperger's. And he points to this like little news clipping that's on the wall and says how his uncle's really smart and he just got an award for science and he's like really intelligent. Again, more of the stereotyping that's a bit more of a problem now than I think it potentially was then. Because the thing then was genuinely awareness, like making people aware that Asperger's existed. Whereas now the movement's kind of developed beyond awareness towards like accuracy and empathy. Like it's become much more about not how people are exceptional, but how they are different.
Yeah. But, and also, you know, about broadening the spectrum, or the people's understanding of the spectrum, rather that just because someone's autistic doesn't mean that they are A, into science, or B, good at science.
Or C, good at drawing, or obsessed with trades. But like they're giving the examples that they know that they've.
But apparently we still need to fucking teach the lesson that people with autism can have PhDs, because apparently that's something still people can't accept.
Yeah, very weird. Very weird. But Brain basically says like, oh yeah, my uncle's really smart, but he has problems with social situations and he gets really nervous when he's around new people. And he goes on to explain the way that his uncle had explained it.
Which I really like, that they make it clear that, you know, talking about it from the perspective of someone with autism. And like what their experience
and the thing that I love about it, as someone who's read around some autistic literature and academic autistic literature, is that this is literally just a child-friendly version of Temple Grandin's theory of an anthropologist on Mars. It's literally the exact same thing. It is about you being on another planet and not being able to understand what people are doing. Anthropologist on Mars is a phrase that Temple Grandin said in an Oliver Sacks book by the same name. And it's essentially her talking about how no matter how much you feel like you can study it, how everyone understands the world, it never comes naturally to you. You always feel like you're having to study the world around you just to interact with it. You always feel like an anthropologist on another planet, where like things are similar and things are recognizable, but they never come naturally, and you always feel isolated on some level. Like, it's a really bleak thing to read in the book. Like, it genuinely stuck with me in such a deep way when I read it, because it was just her having spent a whole weekend being interviewed by Oliver Sacks and him being showed around like her house and her academic work, and her saying like, I invented this hug machine because it helps with deep pressure therapy, and her going through all these things very matter-of-factly, like really controlling the whole weekend and what they did. And then when she drives him to the airport and they sit in the airport car park, she just bursts into tears and says like, I feel like I'm an anthropologist on Mars. Like, none of this felt natural. All of this felt like it had to be under my control. And I don't feel like you understand me at all, even though I put forward exactly what I wanted to put forward. And like, that got to me so personally.
Wow.
And like,
that's,
heavy. It's heavy. And I think that the fact that this show took that metaphor that is so tangible and so real.
It's also good to know that they, you know, read stuff, that they did some level of research before they went and did a story about autism. I wonder if there are certain creators who could learn something from that. I can never stop talking about this fucking music movie,
but like
apparently.
it's gonna be true for a lot of other things as well.
But
like,
anyway,
I will point out Anthropologist on Mars came out like late 80s. So everything we talk about pretty much would have had the opportunity to draw on that.
Yeah.
And many of them choose not to.
So anyway, in this episode of Arthur, they show this... They do a lot... Because it's a kid's show and it's animated, they show, you know, this sort of like vivid, you know, imagination where we see George as an astronaut. I can never say that word naturally in English. It pisses me off. Astronaut. On this weird planet, and we see characters. We see Arthur, who's wearing a strange outfit, and Francine, who is being really loud. And then Brain is narrating over it, you know, how you're an astronaut on a foreign planet, and some people are being really loud and dressing weird, and they don't understand why you find certain things funny, and they use words, but you don't necessarily understand what they mean by those words.
Yeah, they'll say like I think the example they mainly use is them saying like a couple of words you do understand in English, but in an order that makes no sense.
Yeah.
And you just stand there like, I don't understand what, and a lot of it is like very like much as some like pitched to someone who is not autistic.
Yeah.
So if you are an ordinary child and you landed on a planet and somebody was wearing ice cream on their head and shouting all the time, you would think they're really funny and weird, but that wouldn't that would make you feel very different to them, and that could be really upsetting. And it talks about how like its understanding of how hyperfixations work is very outdated, because it talks about how like to try and fit in, you choose something specific to get really good at, and that's how you connect to the world, and that's not how that works.
Yeah.
But like it's how they explain it to kids. My hyperfixation has nothing to do with trying to fit into the world.
Yeah.
Like, it's just sometimes people will have hyperfixations that happen to help them, but there's a lot of people who don't. Like, look at the number of, like, Trekkies or, like, massive Lord of the Rings nerds or, you know, people who are really into Dungeons and Dragons naming no names. It's like, none of that is helpful. None of that is helping me ingratiate myself into society. It's just like...
Well, it's helping ingratiate... I like that you like Star Trek, because that means I can talk bullshit at you for hours and hours.
but like, it's very much a, like, outdated way of explaining it, because... It does also have that weird melancholy tone from the original Anthropologist on Mars still, because it says, like, even if you get really good at stuff and people start adapting to, like, be quieter and, like, understand that you don't necessarily get why they dress that way or why they do certain things, you're always going to feel different to everyone. It still has that melancholy isolation to it.
Yes.
It's very much, like, a brief moment, but, like, I'm glad they included it.
Absolutely.
Because it's the thing of, like, you have to acknowledge as a kid how isolating it can be to feel so separate from everyone.
Yeah.
And, like, you have to make the effort to try and make people feel included.
And on a broader perspective, it's important for kids to learn that there are some problems or whatever that will never be fully resolved. Like, life isn't just, you know, like a fairy tale story where you get, like, a perfectly happy ending where everything is like exactly as it should be. Like sometimes just things remain problems and things remain difficult, and like, that's fine. Basically, that's just something you have to learn to deal with.
A line that stuck with me when I first watched it, and then kind of struck me again now many years later, because I didn't get diagnosed as autistic until I was an adult, so some of that stuff resonated with me and I couldn't figure out why until much later. But, like, the fact that they say, you wish there was a guidebook, but there isn't, so you have to learn how to do everything on your own. Like, you wish there was a guidebook to why everyone does what they do, and that would be so simple, and wouldn't that just make everything so easy? But, like, that's not how it works. Like, it's kind of good that they include that, just in the sense of, like, yeah, you can understand that there would be, like, this wish to just understand everything, but that's not how the world is, and wishing for that doesn't change anything. So it's better to just try and help other people adapt than try and, like, force people to learn how to do it properly. It's an interesting thing, and it is, maybe it's just because I have that context of having read Anthropologist on Mars, but, like, it feels weirdly melancholy to me. I don't know, like, it's not, I don't think it's in a way that where kids would come across as like, oh god, that's so sad, but, like, there is a melancholy to, like, dealing with autism as a child and feeling isolated. Like, there is something sad to that, and I'm glad they included that feeling.
Yeah.
Basically, after this talk with Brain, George feels a lot better about, like, oh, I understand now. I feel like he's probably got a better handle on, like, what to do now, because he's like, oh yeah, he's just a person who does this and he feels this way, and I can understand why he was so upset because things didn't work out. And then he finds the puzzle piece that he was talking about at the beginning of the episode in his pocket, and he's goes, oh no, he's gonna freak out, it'll be all my fault, it'll all be over. Just
he's, you know, painting this, you know, disaster scenario in his own mind, which, again, I love that they show that, because it's this sort of, like, idea of, you know, introducing the idea of like sometimes your own mind is lying to you and blowing things out of proportion.
And it's also the thing of like, it's a concern, like when you have friends who are autistic, especially as children, you get really concerned that the tiniest thing will just spiral them completely. Yeah. And sometimes tiny things do spiral autistic people, but like they make a point of like, he goes back the next day and returns the puzzle piece, and Carl is just like, oh yeah, me and my mum made another piece and we replaced it and it was fine. Because like there are ways to help people like navigate those challenges that would be upsetting.
Yeah.
Like they don't just have like, oh yeah, and if you mess up in a tiny way, it'll ruin everything forever. Because like you can feel that way if you're around meltdowns because they are so intense.
Yeah.
It can be quite scary and you can feel like, oh God, I fucked up so badly.
And it's scary to, you know, be around a person who, you know, like basically thinks differently from you, and things that you can't predict or understand can upset them quite a great deal, and that makes you wonder about everything, like, oh, is this going to upset them, is this going to upset them? Like it can be scary to not know how your friend will respond to situations, because you can't use your sort of like natural, like, you know, your perspective to predict how they will react.
But he comes back and returns the puzzle piece, and Carl replaces it, and his mom's like, hey Carl, can you say thank you? And he just ignores her. And George's like, that's fine, it's okay.
It's a really good line. I think when George first comes over and he says, I've got something for you, and Carl goes, not another puppet. And it was just
like hilarious honesty. But basically,
no, he says, if it's another puppet, I don't want it. I think that
so good. But yeah, he gives the puzzle piece back, and he doesn't expect him to say thank you. Like there's clearly like a moment of I understand that he's not going to do the expected things, and he doesn't mean anything by it, which is like a nice little step. And then it goes out of the framing device, and it's back to like the beginning of the story, and Carl is still talking about his drawing of a train, and they're sitting there talking about their drawings, and Carl says, it was nice to meet you. And George says, oh yeah, he's taught me a lot about how to be considerate, and I taught him how to say that in conversations to make it a little less stressful for him. And it's really sweet, and the episode ends with them still drawing stuff together, and it's just nice. It's sweet. And then there's a live action segment after that I don't think ever got broadcast in the UK.
I think the live action broadcasts were, the live action portions were broadcast in Sweden, but they were again dubbed in, or maybe they were, I forget.
Maybe they refilmed Swedish.
No. I distinctly remember them being like either like weirdly dubbed or just subtitled. But it's a live action segment of a bunch of special needs kids going to one of those like, you know, horse therapy sessions.
Where they just go and ride horses together. And there was like two kids who's like, that's my friend. It's like, that's my friend. It's
like the most, you know, lads but 12-year-olds. It's like, this is my friend Martin or whatever. This is my buddy Martin. And then do like a little fist bump.
It's very sweet. And like, it's nice that they included it of just like, here's some actually autistic kids. And here's the thing they do to help like focus. And they do another part of the live action segment, which is talking to an autistic little girl at school. And it's so funny when they interview kids for these things, but it's even funnier when it's autistic kids who are being extremely honest.
With that, when the autistic girl at school, her best friend also gets like, you know, interviewed, and he's like, I forget what it is, but it's just really cute. It's like, she's my best friend.
She's one of my best friends.
And we do this and this together. It's just kids.
And like she specifically says, even though I have autism, I go to my local school, which like as an adult, you're like, oh God, that sounds bad. But it's like, kids talk like that, especially autistic kids. It's like, I know that people think I should go to a different school. I don't.
Yeah.
Also, she
talks about her, you know, sound blocking headphones, and specifically mentions they don't play music though, because that's important, because clearly it's one of those things where like, you know, you can't have headphones because that's a, you know, distraction and disrespectful, but it's okay if they're just sound blocking. So
and also, you know, there's been like 1,000 conversations where they've learned the next thing people ask is that if they play music, and I don't want to answer that question, so I'm going to just say it now.
Efficiency.
It's like, it's very of its time, this whole like episode as a whole. It's very mid-2000s awareness spreading.
Yeah.
And I think on that front it does quite a good job. But like, considering where we are now with autism and its place in the public eye and how we're way further along to an acceptance place as opposed to an awareness place.
Yeah.
A lot of it's stereotypical, a lot of it hasn't aged great, which is why I'm glad we also did Sesame Street, because that's much more recent.
Yeah.
But I will address the elephant in the room with the Sesame Street thing. Julia, the character we're talking about, is technically supported by Autism Speaks. As far as I can tell, when they created the character, they didn't consult Autism Speaks, and they just came in later. And I think they've like been on and off again, like attached to the show. So like, I would still look into it when you're going to decide whether you want to support that or not. I don't think it affects the characterization so much or the design, because I think those decisions were made prior to Autism Speaks.
It feels like they just, Autism Speaks get to use this character on their posters.
Which is dumb.
It's bad.
It's very bad. But long story short, Arthur, pretty good all round, pretty enjoyable. I think it's worth showing kids, even if it's just as like an introductory thing.
Yeah.
Sesame Street is aimed at kids a lot younger. So like the things it talks about aren't quite as specific. Like we watched a very like compact 10-minute segment about introducing Julia to Sesame Street. I never really watched Sesame Street as a kid. We didn't really have it.
No, I'm trying to remember, because there was a show that was The Muppets in Sweden, but they didn't call it Sesame Street.
We had Elmo's World.
I think it actually was Sesame Street, but it just the name is a bit confusing. But this was like with Bert and Ernie and those guys.
Oh, yeah, I think that's the same thing.
Yeah.
See, we like Jim Henson puppet stuff.
The only thing I remember is this segment where there was a storm. And I think Kermit was there, and that's it. That's the only thing that stuck with me.
Like I don't really know that much. My sister is a really big Jim Henson fan. Like she loves Labyrinth, loves the Muppets. Would probably be killing me if and when she listens to this episode. I'm sorry, Rhiannon. I just don't know things about Muppets.
We watched the Muppets Christmas Carol past Christmas.
It was kind of a weird sadness for me, because it's our family tradition to watch it all together at Christmas Eve, and because of COVID, we couldn't meet up. So we live streamed it at the same time.
Oh, yeah.
Which was strange, and you'd never seen it before. Best Christmas Carol. It just is.
It's pretty good.
Even I still hate Tiny Tim, but at least now he's a frog puppet, so you know.
He's a tiny little frog, which is pretty great. Who doesn't love kid frogs?
But anyway, Sesame Street, Julia. Yep. They do this little like intro thing of Elmo and this fairy character whose name I don't think they ever really bring up, but I'm sure
she has one.
I'm just going to call her the fairy character. And Julia, and they're all painting together along with this guy who's like one of the neighbors on Sesame Street.
Is he like because I know on Sesame Street they sometimes have segments where celebrities cameos.
I don't think it's one of those times, because I think it's the focus is the educational thing.
He's just some guy. Very nice guy. I don't remember his name.
Very friendly. Also, his name didn't come up much because the focus was Julia.
Yeah.
And you can see Elmo and the fairy both painting with their fingers, and the puppets had little like painting caps on their fingers.
Because obviously you can't dip the actual puppets in paint, because could you imagine?
God, no. So like they're all painting with their fingers. I need to point out that Julia has my hair cut. I don't know why that's a stereotype that exists, but she has my hair.
I mean, everyone has bangs nowadays. It's very fashionable. I've been growing bangs.
Also, like I learned recently from an analysis of a character who could not be further away from Sesame Street, Will Graham from Hannibal, is like a lot of the reason that autistic people have fringes or like glasses with thick frames is so that you can fake eye contact, because you just look at your fringe or at the very top of your frames.
Smart.
And you don't actually look at them. So
people can't tell you're not making eye contact if they can't see your eyes.
Yeah. Checkmate, liberals. I don't know why I said liberals. I feel like that's always the thing that comes up with it. But when they're doing this finger painting, they're all talking about the things they're painting, and they're really excited. And Julia's not like engaging with them. She's using a paintbrush, and she's just very delicately like doing precise movements on her page.
Her attention is very much focused on her drawing.
And then Big Bird comes along, and we're going to be mean to Big Bird in this one.
But
it's not his fault. I promise you, we love Big Bird. But Big Bird comes over, it's like, oh, can I see everyone's paintings? And asks Julia to show hers, and Julia doesn't respond. She just keeps painting. And the neighbour just says, oh, that's okay. Julia's just focusing on hers. And they all show off their paintings, and Elmo's done one that's really sweet, and so has the fairy character. They're both very finger painting level quality, like they're not amazing.
Hannah, they're children.
No, my point is that Julia's is a lot better, which is like the whole good at art stereotype kind of came up again, but it's not as laboured a point, so I'm willing to overlook it. But basically,
also, honestly, that's rich coming from an autistic person who's good at writing.
Show me the last time I did some writing, and then I'll believe you that I'm a good writer. D&D does not count.
Yes, it does.
Oh, it doesn't. No,
it does.
It
does. It does.
Anyway,
hey,
Julia is interesting to me because there's so many like aspects of autism that I've only ever seen brought up as jokes, or not at all. She has echolocalia, which is the repeating noises. So she will repeat a word that someone else has said next to her while she's painting and still not engaging with anyone. And they start talking about like, oh yeah, I love doing finger painting because I love the squishy feeling on my fingers. And Julia just kind of makes a groaning noise like, no, I don't like it. So, and the fairy character says, oh, I'm sorry, Julia, I know you don't like it very much, and that's why you're using a paintbrush. Like, it's very much the practical thing of like, some people don't like textures, so we let them do something else. And it's fine. Basically, they have this whole thing with their paintings, and Julia eventually shows hers and still doesn't really respond to Big Bird with them talking. And they start asking, like, hey, Julia, do you want to go play? And she stims. We made it, kids!
It's really neat that they designed the puppet. Or are we supposed to call them Muppets? Is that a thing people joke about? Or
guys, whichever one's the right one is the one we did. I don't want to offend anyone.
Yeah. But anyway, most of these Muppet characters, that they have those sticks attached to the wrists, which, are used to make them gesture. I'm moving like I'm a puppet. But with Julia, they have the sticks like down at her elbows, so that they can flap her arms or her hands in a more natural manner.
Yeah, because they keep her hands very loose. So when they move her elbows, she stims in a very natural, like loose, completely loose, floppy hands, just shaking them up and down. I've never seen that shown in any kids media, because like stimming is always seen as very off-putting and also a thing they try and like train out of kids. But it's so harmless, and I genuinely stimmed as well because I saw it. It made me so happy to see. Basically, they decide, let's all go play tag, and Julia decides to start bouncing everywhere while they're playing tag and saying boing over and over again. And Big Bird's really confused and doesn't understand why she's playing like that and why she keeps ignoring him. And they explain, oh, Julia may not do stuff in the way you expect. She does it in a sort of Julia way. And again, it's the same thing of like, they do things in a way that you wouldn't expect.
I like the phrasing of that because it's sort of, putting the onus a little bit on, the person interacting with the autistic person. Because like, maybe you shouldn't have these like really strict expectations of how people are quote unquote supposed to behave.
Because, like, it makes it really clear that, like, the way that people is supposed to behave, a lot of those don't matter. Yeah. Like, they talk about playing tag and how, like, you're not supposed to bounce around when you play tag. It's like, yeah, but it's more fun, and also, like, why would it matter if we did? Like, it's very much making kids question this, like, ingrained thing of the way you're supposed to do things. Because, like, so much of that stuff is just crap. I'm telling you, the second you become an adult, 98% of people don't give a shit what you do. Like, it's fine. But they managed to convince Big Bird, like, we're just playing a different way. You should try some of the things that Julia does because you might enjoy them. And I love that they put that sentence in there because, like, Sesame Street is aimed at people who don't necessarily have money for, like, TV channels. They don't necessarily have a whole ton of money or resources for, like, educational, like, medical intervention. So if you are an autistic child or you have an autistic child who feels these impulses to stim or to do things differently, by saying you should try things Julia does, you might enjoy them, it has this like level of like, here's how to cope with feeling overwhelmed if you're autistic and you don't have the opportunity to get diagnosed.
Yeah, without necessarily, what's the word I'm looking for?
Lampoon it.
Or putting the pressure on someone. Like maybe you'll enjoy it. Not saying, we're not going to talk about why that might be, because maybe you're not ready to think about that. But or maybe your parents aren't ready to think about that.
Yeah, or maybe you just don't have any other way of like addressing that, but here's how to deal with it. And they kind of build on that as the whole like section goes on, because while they're playing, a fire truck alarm goes off, and Julia gets really overwhelmed, starts covering her ears and groaning. And Big Bird doesn't realize something's wrong and plays tag still, and Julia starts getting really upset and like just shouting and covering her face. And they give her little comfort item, which is a little cuddly bunny, which is very sweet. I like that they normalize like people having comfort items even as they get older, because the whole like, you're too old for a blanket, get that shit out of here. Fuck off. I want a cuddly toy forever. I have like 3 cuddly toys on my bed right now. But
and several in our living room.
And they do the same thing again, where they say, like, it's not your fault to Big Bird, because it isn't their fault, they didn't know.
Yeah.
Like, it's really important to, like, remove blame, because a lot of the time the response that kids will have to, you made this happen, is to get defensive.
Yeah.
And that just escalates everything. Whereas, like, acknowledging that, like, no one's at fault here, this just happened, is really helpful. And they take Julia upstairs, where it's a bit further away from the siren, and they start coaching her through some deep breathing, like, anxiety attack.
Well, it's the neighbor who takes her aside, so it's just her and an adult.
Yeah.
Rather than, like, you know, the entire crowd of children. Puppet children.
Puppet children. Yeah, they go upstairs and they do some coaching through some deep breathing exercises, which, again, could apply to any child, regardless of whether they're autistic or not.
And the neighbor sort of, you know, talks about like, oh yes, the garden, it's, you know, nice sitting up here on the roof or in the balcony, whatever they are. And you can see the city and you can see the so and so. Yeah, just, you know, talking calmly and kind of basically, you know, changing the subject from
being overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Like, it does the colloquial version of, like, the very common panic attack technique I've seen of, like, name 5 things you can see, name 4 things you can like smell, name 3 things you can taste. It's like a way more casual, like less intense, less specific way of doing that. And they go back to Big Bird, who's like, I don't know what I did wrong, I messed up so badly. He's like, Big Bird, this isn't about you. Like, I'm sorry, but like, I know the whole point is that Big Bird feels guilty, and like they're trying to say like, none of us are really exactly the same. You haven't done anything wrong, and Julia's just a little bit different to you, and that's okay.
But also, Big Bird, this isn't about you.
Get over it.
Get over it. And I like the bit where the neighbor and Julia are on the roof, and they're looking down at the garden, and Julia starts laughing, and she's saying, Big Bird. And the neighbor's like, it's you think it's funny because they're called Big Bird, but they look really small from up here. Yeah,
it's a very sweet thing. Like, they never make Julia talk. Like, they very clearly make her level of functioning like non-fully verbal, which is really rare, especially in kids' things where it's like non-verbal but still a person.
Yeah.
Like, it's depressingly rare. But also, one of the lines I really liked and I would legitimately buy merch of was Big Bird saying, oh, I guess it's a bird thing then to flap your hands. It's like really sweet just to say like, it's a bird thing to flap. And they all start like, they basically all become friends and like talk about like, let's all play together in a way that Julia likes, and like try and like involve her in what they're doing. And there's never any point where it's like, we have to be different for Julia. We have to try and make sure we're including her. It's like, they just want to include her, so they do.
Yeah.
It's like this weird thing of like, I hate the whole, it was a big thing when my brother was younger of like, other parents would force their kids to be social with them. It's like, they're left out, go be social with them. And it's like, don't force it, because that just feels way worse.
That's just going to make your kid resent the kid you're trying to force them to include. Like, it's the worst way of going about it.
Whereas in this, it's just like, you want to include them. It's worth including them. Like, you have to make kids want to do it. You can't force it on them because it doesn't work.
Yeah.
But, like, it shows a lot of the progress that's been made since that Arthur episode, I think. Just, like, that it's been approached so differently. Because it's not so much about, like, this is what autism is. They do say that she has autism.
Yeah.
But it's nowhere near as much a, like, here's what autism means. And maybe it's because it's for a younger audience, but it is
I think
much
that's part of it, but
it is also much more about, like, here's how to make her feel included. And, like, I've seen a lot of really sweet stories of people saying, like, oh, yeah, my kids went out to, like, a swimming lesson and they met this other girl who was autistic and their parent was really worried. And it's like, oh, no, I know to be gentle like Julia. And they would just play together and all stim and spin around and do whatever the autistic child wanted to do. So it makes a real difference to have that level of like, oh yeah, and just like giving children a frame of reference for here's the best way to act in this situation so everyone stays happy. And honestly, I do I do feel really glad that stuff has developed to that point with it, and I think it's going to just continue to develop. I'd be really interested to see what kind of content they would make 20 years down the road from now.
Maybe finally in 20 years we can get some bitch autistic representation.
Finally, I can completely ruin that charity stream by being the world's first bitchy autistic.
Autistic people are such a delight to be around. Fuck you, I've never been delightful.
Have you ever been around me when I spoke about D&D for literally 12 hours straight? Nothing else, just D&D? Aren't I a valuable member of your social circle?
We joke, but I love Hannah.
Aww.
I love hanging out with her.
It's very sweet, but I know it's a lot.
Tragically, you can never be the bitch representation we autistic people deserve, Hannah.
No, I'm too nice.
You're too nice.
I'm too afraid of lying.
You're too Catholic.
No! That's a terrible way to describe me. But yeah, I think overall with kids' content, there's definitely a level of like, when you look at it for representation, you have to understand its purpose as an educational tool.
Exactly.
Like, you can't sit there hoping it's going to be 100% accurate representation, because it doesn't really have the capacity to do that for children in a way that will necessarily cater to both autistic people and children who need like help understanding autistic people.
Yeah.
Like, it's something I think both of these do really well for the era they came out in. Arthur, I think, has aged a little bit worse, but not for any reasons that I think are to do with the actual production of the show. Like, everything seems very much done with research, done with care.
Exactly. I think it seems that they were up to date with recent, consensus and recent research when they made that episode, which is really all you can demand of them.
And they also seem to communicate quite closely with people who were autistic and try to find out about their experiences with autism, as opposed to going to charities or to people who live with autistic people. I think
with this sort of stuff you have to think about like the impact, and I think kids who watched the Arthur episode when it came out would be better at hanging out with autistic people after seeing that episode, and I think that means that it's successful in what it's trying to do.
Yeah, it's successful in creating a natural instinctual empathy, as opposed to like you should just feel something for everyone because that's just what the right thing to do as a good human. It's like you have to kind of give people more.
Or again, like even if it isn't like 100% accurate to our understanding of autism now and the autistic experience now, the fact that it hopefully helped both non-autistic kids and autistic kids communicate with each other means that it's, it had a good impact. And I think that's more important than being 100% accurate to the science.
And I think it's also the thing of like, it's one of those things where when I revisited it and I realised it was Anthropologist on Mars, I realised how deeply it affected me, because it made me feel seen in an experience that was very difficult to verbalise as a child, especially as an autistic child, because being able to verbalise emotion is something that's difficult, as you would know if you'd seen our data episode. It got my Star Trek reference in, we did it. But like, verbalising emotion, especially as a kid, but an autistic kid, is extremely difficult. So knowing that there was like a metaphor that sort of expressed this very deeply sad, difficult feeling I had that wasn't anybody's fault, really did impact me and made me feel not quite as like alone and broken at the time. Like, it was helpful to have that kind of analog to me, and I wish I could give every autistic or potentially autistic person on the planet Anthropologist on Mars to read, so they can also be sad but then enlightened. But
I guess the Arthur segment might be better if they're a child, because the text you're talking about is still very academic, isn't it?
Yeah, and also there's a lot of talk about like cow slaughter.
You're a fucking 9-year-old. Yes, read this academic essay, child, and you will understand yourself better. Read
this academic interview by a neurologist that talks extensively about the design of the human brain and also a cow slaughtering factory.
It's from the 80s. That's when your parents were young.
Maybe. They could be our age.
Yeah. Damn.
That's fucked up. I think that's probably a good place to call it. I think this is overall good, but again, with a mindful look towards its purposes educational as opposed to purely entertainment.
Or being, an accurate like representation of the current science.
Yeah, because you can't expect that from stuff after time has passed. The stuff we criticize that is older, I feel like we try and be more aware of that, but there's definitely stuff where it's just like, you just didn't look up anything.
Yeah.
You had something you could have looked up, but you didn't.
Yeah, and I mean, it says a lot that the episode of Author that's from the early 2000s is a more accurate representation of the autistic experience than certain movies that came out last year that I would never dream of naming. Or did it come out this year?
God, time is an illusion during COVID.
Yeah.
But also that film is so out of time because it was delayed so much.
It's so fucking funny how it came outdated. I will never get over that.
But this is the end of our episode. We will try and be more consistent with uploads, I promise. And next time...
Hannah promises. I promise nothing because I have learned about myself enough to know never to promise anyone anything.
Also because I know the thing I want to do next, and this involves making Tilda listen to a fucking Dungeons and Dragons podcast.
No!
So, shut up, it's good! It's Dimension 20. I'm just going to say it's Dimension 20, and now I have to commit and make you watch it. It's too late. The cat is out of the bag.
But it's so long.
I'm not going to make you watch all of it. It's fine. You'll love her, I promise. I love her, so you have to. Anyway, this was Spectrum Projection with your hosts Hannah and Tilda. Our theme music is Summer Longing by Tilda. Send us suggestions for future topics to spectrumprojection@gmail.com or to our Twitter and Facebook pages at SpecProj Podcast. Thanks.
Bye.